Pelican Beat sat down with Representative Brett Geymann to learn more about his proposal that would ban the use of one-time money for recurring expenses in the state budget.
Sure. My name is Brett Geymann, and I represent the Southwest Louisiana area. I live in Moss Bluff, Louisiana. My district is number 35, and again, we represent Calcasieu Parish and Beauregard Parish together.
Tell us about your family.
I'm married. I've been married for 25 years. I have 3 children, one at LSU, one at McNeese, and one at Sam Houston High School. I'm a salesman for an oil field supply company that's a family-owned business, and we also own a screen printing and sign company that my wife runs while I'm over here in the legislature.
What made you decide to run for office?
I've had a lifelong love of politics. I grew up in a family that I can remember when I was very young, the political discussions around the supper table and those kinds of things. I just grew up with being around that environment. And as I got older, I became more and more interested in it. When I went to college, I actually studied government, became very active in the political party. The Republican Party actually, became a member of the Parish Executive Committee, ran and served on the State Central Committee, and actually then I ran for a local seat on the police jury and lost, and thought maybe that might have been the end of my career, but I came back 3 years later and ran for the State Representative seat and won, and so that's how I'm here today.
Can you give us some background on one-time money in the budget?
Sure. When I got here in 2004 under Kathleen Blanco as governor, I became exposed to the one-time money use. And now one-time money can be used as long as it is spent on 6 constitutional areas that are defined in the Constitution. However, there is a routine that we do where we take money that has not been recognized by the Revenue Estimating Conference as non-recurring, and we shift it or transfer it to another fund, where we then draw it down and use it on operating expenses, or what we say are recurring expenses. That is a complete violation of the Constitution, or the expression of the Constitution of the legislature and the people, where they define non-recurring money as being able to only be used in those certain areas. So that is the philosophical debate of should we be using one-time money on recurring expenses, because the next year those dollars may not be available, and really all we're doing is kicking the can down the road. And of course, one-time money we would simply define as money that we do not know that will be available next year. There's no revenue stream. They don't forecast it to be there and available to use the following year. So when we rely on that, we tend to get ourselves in trouble in the future, because the next year, as we try to pay for those expenses again, we have to go out and search for more one-time dollars. And that is the problem. And of course, after Katrina, Rita, state government grew at about 10 or 15%, more so than we normally grow. And unfortunately, we're unable to sustain that over a long period of time, because that is much higher than the historical growth of the economy. So now we're in that situation where we're actually in a downturn, and we're looking for ways to plug holes, and so we've become really, really dependent on one-time money, even though we've used it every year. I would also mention that we specifically are worried about the one-time money from the state general fund, not necessarily federal dollars that come in for recovery, the stimulus money, those kinds of things that come in from the federal government. We're not focusing on that. We're really trying to make it a little more difficult to use the one-time money from the state general fund.
Can you explain the process? What is one-time money?
All right, one-time money we tend to identify as money that's not available for more than 1 year. So if there's some money that we're using in the budget that's not going to be available next year, we're going to define that as one-time money. Where we tend to find that is through the transfer of fund balances. For instance, in Calcasieu Parish, we have a Calcasieu Parish fund that's generated from revenue from the local racetrack. And those dollars are deposited into that fund, where it's then spent in the areas of education. So at the end of the year, if there is a balance, and we go in and sweep that fund, is the language we use over here, we go in and take that money out of that fund and transfer it into another fund, where it then enters the general budget and is spent on recurring expenses, travel, salaries, vehicles, things like that, vehicle expense. Which is an ongoing expense. And so we are trying to stop the reliance on those one-time dollars for the operating expenses of this state. those dollars should be only dollars that we're going to recognize year after year after year. And essentially, I like to equate it to the national government, where we all get irritated when they print more money and they continue to spend, rather than try to live within their means. Now, we can't print money, but we can go out and find one-time dollars and use to fill a hole. There's a good argument as to whether or not you should ever use one-time money on recurring. Many people believe that there are times where you need to bridge over to the next year, and that's certainly a viable debate. However, we have become addicted to it, and if you look back over the past 8 years, we've used one-time money repeatedly. Even in surplus years, we've used it. So we are making an effort to make a hurdle that we have to cross over by requiring a 2/3 vote on any instrument dealing with appropriations that has one-time money spent on recurring expenses.
How has this issue unfolded over the last 2 administrations?
Sure. I've served under Blanco and Jindal, and as a Republican under Blanco in the latter part of her term, after the recovery efforts began and the revenue began to pour in, we were trying to spend everything that came in, including, in many cases, spending what we thought was one-time revenue, one-time dollars on recurring expenses. And the Republican minority at that time objected to that repeatedly because we felt like in the long term that would be a problem. And of course, moving into the Jindal term, they inherited a budget that I remember that had some one-time money on recurring expenses that they had to deal with in their very first year. However, we haven't seen any effort to get off of that reliance of one-time money. And because of that, we have decided in our last year of this term that it's time to try to put an extra hurdle in there, make it a little more difficult, require a 2/3 vote. If anything, it will bring awareness to the issue. Many people in the chamber, when we vote on the budget, are not even really aware of what the one-time money is and where it's going and where it came from. So we believe that just by having to have that debate, that we will bring awareness to it and perhaps at least slow down the reliance on the one-time money. Maybe not stop that practice, but maybe slow it down, and that of course would be better for the long term of the state. We have a bill, a House rule that will do that. We simply require a 2/3 vote if we use one-time money in the budget on recurring expenses. So we're hoping to pass that. We do have some amendments that we're looking at adding to that might trigger it under certain circumstances where you wouldn't have to get the 2/3 vote, and we're looking at those, and we'll see how that goes.
How does the proposed House rule work? How is this different from a bill?
We ended up through weeks and weeks of working on this issue where we originally pre-filed a bill that would have been a House bill, which would have been a statute had it passed to do this, and we ran into some issues of whether that was circumventing the Constitution. By that, we mean that the Constitution says that you only need a simple majority to pass an appropriations bill. So if we required a 2/3 to pass it through a statute, there was an issue of a constitutional issue of what happens in fact if the budget passes with less than a 2/3 and it has one-time money on recurring expenses. Would you follow the Constitution or would you follow the statute? In working through that issue, as we tried to fix it, we came up with the idea of doing a House rule. A House rule is binding to the House only. However, the budget starts in the House, goes to the Senate, and comes back to the House. So we catch it when it leaves and we catch it when it comes back. So if the House rule is in place and it requires a 2/3 vote as a separate motion from the passage of the budget, we believe that it is constitutional. We crossed that hurdle, and also the fact that when it comes back from the Senate, it would additionally have to cross that same test of 2/3 vote if it does have one-time money on recurring expenses. And the other part of that is it becomes effective immediately. Upon passage on Monday, if it passes, it would become effective immediately. So therefore, it would affect the current budget that we're discussing on Wednesday. And additionally, it doesn't need the signature of the governor, nor can he veto it. So it's pretty powerful in the way that we're using it on this particular item.
What do you need to get it passed?
On a House resolution, which that's what this is, a House rule, it only requires a majority of those present and voting. Worst case would be if everybody's in the chamber, we would need 53 votes.
What kind of reception are you getting from members?
We are getting mixed reception from some of the members. We have some that are concerned about having to get the 2/3 vote, believing that that may complicate the budget process. We have many that are very excited about it, believe it will provide some extra input on the budget, believe it will make us a little more independent from the administration on the budget process, give the legislature a little more input. Many of us believe that it will, in fact, over time, perhaps, wean us from that addiction of using one-time money for recurring expenses and make us more fiscally responsible. We can take those same dollars that we're using on recurring expenses and use them in the constitutionally listed areas where you can use non-recurring money, pay off debt, pay off retirement debt, use it on infrastructure, those kinds of things, and still use those one-time dollars and be fiscally responsible in the budget, that we don't continue to kick the can down the road, because at some point we're going to have to fill that hole.
Are you getting support from the administration on this?
At this point in time, the administration is strongly opposed to the measure. We did reach out to them in the last few days with some ideas that maybe would make it more acceptable to them. We have not heard back. I suspect that they will not support the measure at all. However, we may be able to make it more workable for them if it does pass, and of course we want to try to do that. But at this point, they are strongly opposed.
How might the resolution be amended to have a better chance to pass?
Some of the things that we have suggested through discussing with other members to make it more workable would be perhaps a trigger that under certain circumstances that this measure would not apply, perhaps in a downturn in the economy, perhaps spending up to the next year's revenue estimated increase in the budget, perhaps moving the measure to next year, which that one is not likely to be something that we would offer. Those are the types of things that we're discussing right now. However, we probably will just try to amend it into a form that would make it more workable under certain circumstances. At least that's the way we're leaning right now. I don't know how the administration is going to react to any of those proposals. We did offer them and have not heard back at this point.
Do you feel like there's been an open door for communication with the administration?
We have had numerous conversations with the administration. In fact, when we pre-filed the House bill, which did this, we actually asked the administration to consider putting it in their package. They did not choose to do that, and we moved on from there. But once we filed the House resolution about 2 weeks ago, we have had numerous meetings with them, numerous conversations over the phone, trying to get through the roadblocks and the issues of their objection, and we have been unable to do that. However, we did reach out again with a couple of amendment ideas that we have that perhaps would make it more workable for them, but again, they have not responded to those.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about the challenges of the budget process?
The biggest challenge is that we're in a $1.6 billion shortfall this year that we're in now, and of course the administration has found a way to not have cuts through some efficiencies, which we certainly appreciate that, but also through using a large amount of one-time money, perhaps selling prisons and other ideas, which we certainly want to support them in every effort that we can to get through these times. But the reality is we can't continue to kick the can down the road, and we've been doing that for several years. We've been doing it trying to hope things got better, and they are going to get better, but still in all we have a large shortfall where we're spending more money than we're bringing in, and we just can't continue to do that. At some point we're going to have to make some painful decisions, try to realize what the people of this state expect us to provide in government, and try to do that as fiscally responsible as we can.